Okay, let me just make sure. Okay. Oh, somebody else has come in. There we are. So, excellent. I've chosen the quietest room in the house, but it's my daughter's bedroom, so it has some quite nice decorations on the ceiling and stuff. All right. Okay, well, maybe I'll move to my presentation to get, or the little introductory slides, and then we'll get started so we have enough time to have the presentations as well as a good chance for discussion. So just let me share my screen. Okay, so I'm just moving everybody up to the top. So welcome everyone to, I guess, day 2 of FANSA's online conference. As much as we would all love to be seeing each other in the same place and, you know, enjoying a good coffee break and a chat, this will have to do for now. So welcome. And I'll just say a few words at the very beginning, and then we'll move into the presentations. The format we have is that we'll have 2 presentations. We'd ask if you have questions for sort of clarification after each presentation, or specific questions, please feel free to ask them. You can ask in the question and answer section of the Zoom interface or in the chat, and I can ask them to our panelists. Also, if it's something that's maybe harder to express, we can also give you the opportunity to speak as well. But for now, as you can sort of see with this Zoom setup, you can hear us and you can see us, and we can't see you. So I have to say it's a little bit of it's different than our usual Zoom meetings where you have sort of tons of people on your screen. It's good to see you all in the chat, and if you haven't done so already, just let us know where you're from, so it kind of gives us a feeling of, you know, at least a little bit of connection to where you are today. Before I get started, I just wanted to remind anybody out there who is in an organization or a city or a research institute or a think tank that is not yet a member of FANSA, that FANSA has changed its membership structure, and this is the moment for those entities, organizations, ministries who are not already members of FANSA to join. So we just have a short slide over here, basically showing you the benefits of membership and encouraging you to take this opportunity, particularly now as there's quite a spotlight shining on homelessness right now, and what we need to do to keep everybody safe, in particular in these times of global pandemic. And very clearly, housing is one of the, you know, the best ways to keep people safe and from infection, as well as to really make a dent in ending homelessness. So I will let you take a little look at the slide. I think most of you know what FANSA does and how we work, but now it's your opportunity to join with us and help really to make a difference and end homelessness in Europe. So next I'm going to introduce our speakers. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and move in. I'm just going to check if there's any, sorry, there's just, there's somebody signed in, just checking, offering help, which is great. And I'm going to introduce our speakers. So just give me one moment to find my notes. So we'll have two presentations today. The first is from Jakub Wilczek, who's a co-founder and since 2014, the president of the Polish National Federation for Solving the Problem of Homelessness, which currently has 26 member NGOs. Jakub is finance vice president and member of the Polish Ombudsman's Homelessness Commission. He's a former board member of the St. Brother Albert's Aid Society for 12 years, and he's currently involved in developing Polish deinstitutionalization programs and in researching Housing First programs in Poland. The Housing First program has been implemented with the European Social Fund financing by St. Brother Albert's Aid Society since 2019 in 3 cities, in Gdansk, Wrocław, and Warsaw. Following, we'll have a presentation from Vanessa, and I'll introduce her when we get to that part of the program. So, if I can ask Jakub to share his screen and start with his presentation.
Okay, hello everyone. The awkward moment of sharing the screen. Just a moment. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, that looks great.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm to speak about shifting mindsets from the staircase model to housing first, which is what is exactly happening right now in Poland, because we've just started our first two housing first projects. One is being run by St. Brother Albert's Aid Society, but I will tell you more about the two projects later on. Firstly, let me introduce the situation which we are in at the moment. We're a 38 million nation in a deep housing crisis, and I will get to that as well in just a moment, but it's very important to say that as a first thing that we have this housing crisis for 30 years going on right now. We have approximately 30 to 40,000 homeless people in Poland, but that is according to a very narrow definition that is stated in the Social Assistance Act. That definition excludes people who are couch surfing, for example, or who are in some kind of non-standard situations. So generally in this definition, there are only people who are rough sleeping or who are in the institutions. For example, people in transitional housing are not considered homeless anymore, according to Polish law. 20% of homeless people, approximately, of course, are rough sleeping. About 80% are men, mostly single men in their middle age. Though there is a growing concern about youth homelessness in Poland, which is clearly simply invisible to the system, because young people don't want to use the homeless institutions, and they are not recognized by the system. So there is a question of youth homelessness right now, and a growing discussion on that. I think the major problem in Polish homelessness is that more than half Polish homeless people are in homelessness longer than 5 years, which is very long for homelessness episodes. And we think that just for this reason, housing first is something that is very, very needed in Poland. We have a vast network of institutions. There's approximately 900 of them, mostly 24 hours shelters. There is about 200, I think, interventional institutions like overnight shelters. Altogether, the system consists of about 25,000 beds. So you can see it's pretty large. And it's a system that grew in the beginning of 90s as NGO environment reaction to economical changes in Poland, which put many people behind. The state at the moment didn't very much care about the housing situation of the most vulnerable people, and the NGO sector did what they could do. So they started to give people beds in institutions, and then the system was petrified by the Social Assistance Act, by the law. And at the moment, it's kind of difficult to change it simply, difficult to shift the minds. Um, we also have some protected and supported flats. This is how we call them in Poland. Generally, these are flats for people in special situations. They are not available to anyone. And their purpose is to train the ability to live independently for a short time. And usually, in case of homeless people, they are almost always in a staircase model. Um, but as I said at the very beginning, we have our two first Housing First projects running at the moment. They started in 2019. The beginning of 2020 was when we started to put people in housing, but then COVID happened. And that obviously meant some delays in the project. So there are some people who are with us in their flats already for 8 or 9 months. And there are some who were housed just recently in the last 2 months, I'd say. The two projects are being run by different institutions. One of them is Umbrella Roberts Aid Society, which is a major Polish service provider, which runs more or less 10% of the institutionalized help. The project is in partnership with the Polish National Federation for Solving the Problem of Homelessness in 3 municipalities, which are partners in the project as well. This is Gdańsk, Warsaw, and Wrocław, and we have 10 flats in each of these cities. Also, we have a transnational partner, which is IAPS from Portugal. And the project requires us to follow the method implemented in Portugal. It's more or less similar in the other project, which is being run by the Corporation Foundation. They have 20 flats in Warsaw only, and they work in a transnational partnership with Finnish Y Foundation. So how did we get there? How Housing First started in Poland? We knew about Housing First for some 10 or 15 years already, but in Polish housing situation, it was hard to imagine to even implement it. But 2014 to 2016, we had a major project on advocacy and research on chronic homelessness that spread the news about Housing First, I think, much wider than it was before. And it became quite obvious that we are at a certain point of time that we should start thinking about implementing the first Housing First in Poland. And it happened thanks to ESF Transnational Platform and Fianza, obviously. We had a ESF Transnational Platform meeting in Brussels in 2017. We were brought together, NGOs and the managing authorities from different countries. And the Polish managing authority expressed a need for transnational projects in the area of social integration. They said that they have very low spending in transnational projects. And at one of the tables, I remember that we were sitting with Swedish and Lithuanian partners. We started thinking about using that these funds for Housing First in Poland, maybe in Lithuania and Sweden as well. There was such a proposition. It didn't work out after all. But we established a contact with managing authority, and we started feeding them with information on Housing First. And they started working on a call for projects. A year later, the call was ready. In the meantime, we were working hard with ESF Transnational Platform and Fianza to have a meeting in Poland, in Warsaw, on which we wanted to promote the rights-based approach. There was a great effort from Polish human rights ombudsman as well on this meeting. We were promoting the homeless bill of rights there, but also we, thanks to ESF transnational platform, we were able to bring 12 people from 12 European countries, and we had them sit at the 12 tables and meet Polish delegates just to talk how they can use the call for transnational projects that was about to be announced by the managing authority. And the call was announced a few months later. Two housing first projects were proposed. I think 8 other housing projects, but not following housing first principles as well. And after the long negotiations, unfortunately, in June and July 2019, we started officially started the projects with half-year preparation time and implementation of housing first starting at the beginning of 2020. So what we have learned so far from implementation of housing first. First of all, COVID was definitely a threat, not only in housing first, generally in homelessness services. Very many things changed due to COVID, but also COVID triggered a discussion on homelessness. Homelessness became more visible, and the media, the government officials became more interested in COVID. And the first message, the most important message, was that institutional system is a problem in COVID situation. That it would be much easier to provide proper help in flats, simply in housing. So yeah, in this way, COVID became a chance, and we still hope that we will be able to use it simply as a leverage for changes in Polish system of homelessness support. On the other hand, the ESF. Of course, it was a chance. Without ESF, we wouldn't be able to start those projects, but it also became a threat. First of all, because of limited duration of the projects, and we still have no guarantee of continuation of those projects past 2022, because the implementation under the ESF projects will last only for 1.5 years. Then there is a year of obligatory sustainability period, and then we have no idea what will happen. We hope that we will be able to present good results, which will be enough to convince the municipalities to take over the financing, but we don't know that yet. The other problem with ESF is, of course, lack of flexibility. For example, we were not able to fully implement the research that is required in the housing first method, because the ESF authority told us that this is not an experimental project. This is only copying transnational best practices. Of course, we've learned that housing first is difficult. We have some problems with some of our users, but this is a minor group. I mean, the problems they are causing, which we are right now seeking answers to, provoke a lot of discussion, and they may seem as a major problem at the moment, but it's only about 10% of the users. So this is why I wrote still worth it in the slide, because the other 90% are in housing. So it's a major step forward for them, and some of them really show very good progress. Transnational learning is very important here. It was a very good idea to have this pilot housing first implementation under a transnational project, because we can always turn to our transnational partners who have much more experience in that, and ask them for advice, for best practices on working with our clients. We also, for example, have a conference next week, and we have one of the Scottish organizations coming to Poland just to speak on how to deal with problems with in working with users. So the other thing we've learned is that shifting minds in the NGOs will not be that hard as we expected. It seems that most of our organizations, because St. Brother Albert's is a large organization working in 70 cities, only 3 of them are in the project, and there's 67 other cities looking on what will happen. But there is no negativity here. There is no people who saying you won't succeed with that. This should not be carried out. We think that much more difficult, that we will have much more difficulty with changing the minds of authorities, and what is more important, of the general public. And this is where we come to the problem of housing, which is very, very scarce in Poland. This is due to privatization of the housing stock in the municipalities that started 30 years ago in the 90s, and it's still going on in some municipalities. And the lack of interest of in fulfilling the housing needs of the most vulnerable people. At the moment, Poland is at the bottom of housing saturation index of the EU. We have the top position in the index of overcrowding in our housing. And for example, we also have one of the highest places in the index of age of living parents' home. We are in a major housing crisis, and due to that, due to scarcity of the housing, housing is considered a luxury in Poland. So there is no public consent for housing homeless people, especially that due to huge stigma, they are mostly considered guilty of their own situation. So housing them is considered rewarding them for being reckless. And this is something we definitely have to work on if you want to scale housing first up. So what tools do we use to change the mindsets? Well, first of all, we do a lot of meetings with NGOs, with local authorities, with government. We try to give as much information on housing first and why it is so very important to introduce it in Poland on a large scale to any stakeholder that is possible. But all of these tools written here require research results. So research is obviously very, very important here, and we only have started it. So far, we can say that we have some positive results, but it's only our internal observation. It doesn't come from research results. Another tool is finding allies, and our huge ally is the Polish human rights ombudsman. He did a lot to promote the homeless bill of rights. He also does a lot to promote housing first. Yeah, we're trying to find powerful allies who have a major impact on not only on the government, because we also work with the government, but also on the general public. Publishing information is also very important. We have translated the Housing First Guide Europe, Housing First Europe Guide. We have translated it. We have just published it, so we hope that it will be available to most of the sector. Major municipalities, and that will help understand why it is better to give people housing than keep them for many years in institutions. Another thing that happened along our implementation is the fact that we are in the middle of creating the strategy of sorry, that's a difficult word. Okay, DI, you know what DI is.
Well, and Jakob, can I just say, maybe can you take just another, a few more minutes to another 3, 4, 5 minutes to wrap up, so we have time for just giving you the warning, and also deinstitutionalization.
Thank you so much.
It's hard for me too. They make it hard.
The I process is the requirement from the European Commission for the next ESF period 2021-2027, and we have to implement it as a country. So there's a huge area of discussion thanks to this between the NGO sector and the Ministry of Social Policy. Which gives us also space to promote housing first as DI tool. The last thing is public relations. We didn't come that far yet, but we feel that it is needed to convince the general public on the necessity of having housing first in Poland. So I won't bore you with research then. I will just say it's very, very important to have good research results, not only positive, but also good in the meaning of being prepared by an external research team, not an internal team. So they are more convincing to the people who read them. But where do we go from here? We have specified a list of 8 targets we want to pursue in the coming years, and first of them is obviously rights-based approach. We already have one city, it is Gdańsk, which implemented the Homeless Bill of Rights, and we want to do that in other cities. We want to remind our government that they are obliged to follow the right to housing since it was ratified by Poland in 1977. So they may have forgotten they did that, and what's happening in Poland shows that obviously at some point they did forget that. We want to change the definition of homelessness in Poland to follow the ETS typology. We want to follow the DI process, of course. Thank you very much, European Commission, for that. That was a huge improvement that happened this year. But it will be impossible to introduce full DI without a general improvement in housing situation for everybody. So we need to work on that. I mean, not we as a NGO sector, but we as a country. We want to change the local connection rules so it stops affecting the support services and access to housing. We want to promote outreach services and peer support as the base for reaching the people who are in the most need of housing first services. We want to promote research in general homelessness area. We want to motivate the different departments, different ministries to work together on homelessness, because at the moment in Poland, homelessness is a sole responsibility of social assistance without almost any link with housing or health. And without that, it will be very difficult to introduce deinstitutionalization or housing first method. And then after all of these, we still need to work on the stigmatization of homelessness. This is obviously very important for us to have public acceptance for proper services for homeless people. Thank you very much. I think that wraps it up.
Sorry to rush you at the end there, but anyway, I think it was a really, really good overview, and I was really interesting. I have my own questions, of course, which I will ask. I will save my questions for after as well. But I thought it was very interesting how Poland has been able, how you've been able to leverage the European social funds to be able to develop these pilot projects. But as you say, they definitely flag up this issue of housing first should not be time limited. So if that funding is time limited, how do you make sure that it transitions into sustainable funding? And you know, all of the issues that you brought up, I think are consistent across Europe. The housing issue in particular, Poland's not the only country that has this very tight housing market, and it feels hard to even find just a little, you know, those few apartments that you might need in each small city. But I was very encouraged how you said that the sector doesn't feel as difficult to move, because I think that quite often we feel that that will be a barrier, but it sounds like it's moving faster and more quickly than you thought. And I think maybe, yeah, together we can all work on that sort of cooperation. How do we move? How do we convince local authorities? How do we convince housing providers, private or public? And the big destigmatization issue, that's something that I think if we link back to what you said about COVID, that this might be a moment where people are more open to think about people who are homeless in a more humane way than they might have done in the past. So that might be something to think about. But anyways, very interesting, and thank you. And we'll come back for more questions, but I will hand over now to Vanessa before I take up too much of her time. And I'll just introduce you. So Vanessa holds a BA in political science and administration and a BA in sociology. She's committed to social action and a believer and supporter of the European social policies. She's been working in Hogarsi, which was formerly called Raiz, for those who don't know about the name change. And she's been there since 2016 and is currently the International Affairs Director. So I'll hand over now to Vanessa. Can you share your screen? Yeah. And
let me share my screen. Just one moment.
And again, to the participants, if you have questions, there's a question box for question and answers. You can type them in and we'll ask them afterwards, or you can always put them into the chat as well. So
can you see my screen?
We can, yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So
we see like the whole frame. I don't know if you have a presentation mode. There we go. Perfect.
Okay. Thanks, Jacob, as well, because I don't know if it's okay or not, but it's always interesting to know that we share the same worries, the same barriers, and also sometimes the same solutions. So that's really interesting. So let's begin. It's who are we? As Samara said, we were called before RISE Foundation. We are an NGO working with homeless people at national level. We work from a human rights perspective to make the change possible, and we have been working for homeless people for more than 20 years. How is the context where we work? In Spain, according to the last official data from 2012, I know it's a long time ago, but it's the last official data that we have, there were 31,000 homeless people, from which 8,000 were sleeping rough. Obviously, we know that the reality is that the number is much higher and more taking into account the current situation. But we have to play with these figures. Also, in 2018, the system offered more than 20,000 beds in homelessness services, and 65% of these beds were in care centers. So it's clear that our system is based on a case model, in which it's obviously that there are a small percentage of people that are success, and many people are using these services in a stable way, or as well as a revolving door, which imply that the chronification is increasing and their life expectancy is decreasing. So, sorry. What is happening with housing first programs in this context or in this framework? As we know, the number of people on the street is increasing, and the data show that there is an increase of the amount invested in homelessness services and in homelessness in general too in the last years. Nevertheless, according to official figures, housing first option are only less than 2% over the total places for homelessness people all over Spain. So this can you make you an idea that the policies that we are implementing are not the most appropriated for homelessness people? Because if we are investing more money and we have more people living on the street, that's something that is wrong. So last year we estimated that there was around 500 housing first units available, and were managed around 20 organizations. And 2020, COVID. The COVID, which in general, we don't know yet the global consequences or the impact on housing first policies in a medium long term. So I'm going to try now to share with you what we have learned and our experiences in our way to shifting mindset during this period. First of all, it's very important for us to share our approach from person to the problem. For us, homelessness is not an individual issue. It's a structural problem, of course, and it's obviously that this must be include housing. Homeless people must be in the center, and homelessness must be focused on a strategy, must be dealing with a national strategy or a national policies. So with this approach and with this philosophy, we began with a pilot project of housing first called Habitat of 28 units in 2014. And nowadays we have together our partner Provivienda, that most of you maybe knows. It's Provivienda is an organization specialized in housing, and we work together in this program. We almost manage 300 housing first houses, which means that we are managing 60% of the total housing first houses in Spain. Then, what we have learned during these 6 years from 28 units till 300. In other times, because now it's different, but I think that some of these key elements are still being useful in the times that we are living. So this short list of elements that in our experience were working to convince the public administration of the necessity of change and the development of these processes. For us, it's very important to have data. Data from national and international housing first evaluations and research versus, at least in Spain, the lack of data and results from the traditional systems and the traditional resources. Also, and it's completely linked with the data, the housing first cost. Housing first cost at the end are similar or cheaper in their implementation and much cheaper in their development, not only for economic reasons, but also because the social impact that housing first methodology has. So when you go to negotiate with some administration, public administration, they ask you, "Is going to work? Please, you have here the data, and how is going to cost? How much is going to cost? Because I don't have money to implement new policies, blah blah blah." This is the cost efficiency that Jacob mentioned as well. So that's very important. For us, it was very useful as well, the experiences in different ways. In one way, the experience of other collectives and the lobbying alliances with mental health, addiction, or disability non-for-profit organizations that have previously gone from institutions or and shelters to community housing based solutions. That was important because if other collectives can do it, why homeless people can't? So that's important to have in mind. And also, it was useful for us, the experience and express needs of clients, the users of our programs. Surveys among clients can be very useful to demonstrate that homeless people think that the house is the first thing that they need to solve homelessness. Also, visit to housing first units usually were very useful for us. You know, politicians make the photo. But I understand that this situation with the COVID-19 is not the most easy situation to implement this kind of activities. But why not a virtual visit or something similar that we are now using this kind of technologies? So we need to change the elements that works before. So it could be an idea. But to participate in European projects and networks is very useful as well, because at the same time that the public administration asks you about data and how much is the program and so on, other question is, or other sentence that they say is, this is not going to work here. This methodology or this philosophy because of a special context or circumstances from this country, for this region, for whatever. So if you are participating in European projects and you have contacts in Europe, even at international level, it could be helpful to demonstrate that housing first methodologies works in everywhere where it has been implemented. So in this line as well, it's important involve the university, for example, in the evaluations. It's important because it gives you, as Jacob mentioned this as well, the external evaluation. So it's important because it gives you a neutral and objective of your own results. So it's, or for example, publishing articles in academic magazine, that kind of things. It's important to make your data, your research, your evaluation more reliable. And finally, mass media. Mass media, it's media appearances. If you are on TV or in newspapers, you are near of the citizens' worries. So if homelessness is a worry for citizens, it must be a problem. Please understand my point of view. It's a problem for politicians. So it's a way to begin to negotiate better policies to finish or to eradicate homelessness. So this is an overall list of elements, but of course, this is what we work for us, but it's important as well to know the challenges that we have to face. So the challenges, and that was I was saying at the beginning, some of them are really similar to Jacob's presentation, but that's it's one of the thing that we have to fight with this. So define public policies. Define public policies that make homelessness visible and address it in a specific, transversal, and effective way. Because sometimes it's just one word, or is missing, even is missing, homelessness is missing in policies. So it's very important to define public policies. Also, the specific budget. You can have a very important or very beautiful national strategy or regional strategy for homelessness, or very good housing first program. But if you don't have a specific budget linked with that strategy or with that program, that is going to be for nothing. It's going to be only paper. So, for example, in Spain, we are now negotiating, in the process of the negotiating for the new national strategy for homeless people, in which the current one is including housing first approach, but we didn't do anything because that strategy doesn't have a budget or any budget link. So the activities has been very poor to that strategy. So now is the time that negotiate or press to link a real budget to implement the activities in the new strategy. So if we achieve this point, it's going to be easier, much easier, all the development after the strategy. So other thing is coordination that it was mentioned as well by Jacob. It's we have an important problem between ministries, Ministry of Social Services, who deal with homelessness, and Ministry of Housing. But there's no it's a matter. How homelessness is not a housing ministry matter. That's amazing, but it's true. So it's also is the same with health or employment. Anyway, with a lot of departments in government. So it's very important to try to sit the right people together, and to try to talk about the solutions. Also in Spain, and I'm sure that this happened in the same in other countries, we have a conflict of competences between national, regional, and local government. It's a nightmare to deal with this every day, because there are different level of policies, and for example, housing is it's different the level of competences. So it's very difficult. This is a challenge that we have to face, because it's not going to change, because it's the Spanish structure. So this is the thing is that we have to focus on how to manage in the best way. In this line, it's important to try to have government stability, because if you have government stability, you can try to make policies longer, and sustainability of public policies, as we mentioned before. Housing first is a methodology that is looking for long-term solutions. So if you don't have government stability, it's difficult to achieve that commitment with this kind of policies. And in this line as well, it's important to try to generate a friendly administrative, legal, and financing environment for the technical implementation of housing first projects run by public administrations. Because if you start a housing first project running by a public administration in the administrative right way, it's more probably that this project go further than other that maybe is not it is not a contract or a call, or the administrative level is very important to take into account. And I agree with Jacob that professional transitions of homelessness services based on emergency management towards a system focus on eradication of homelessness is very important to facilitate that atmosphere, that context to the professionals that are working in the traditional service, because they are used to work in the opposite way that housing first model works. So it's very important to accompany them, training, support them as you can. Even we have to do it with our own staff, because they at the end they sometimes forgot or that they have to put the person in the center and so on. So it's difficult to be always in the right way. Just the few things more to finish, because we think that housing first is an opportunity to claim the human rights to housing and generate a homelessness solution in a rights approach based model. And also it's a solid argument for achieving a change in the discourse that defines homelessness as a structural problem and basically as housing access problem. So public policies must aim to transform the current homelessness system. It's necessary to stop addressing the problem of people who have spent years and years living on the streets as individual and emergency situation. And this situation, and this is how homelessness is managed currently. Emergency solution with temporary better spaces in shared accommodation that are neither effective nor efficient. So the COVID-19 has shown that having a house is crucial for people. Then it's time now to try to take the advantage of this situation and to implement policies that address homelessness as a housing problem, and that develop innovative solutions to guarantee the right to housing as a priority for those experiencing homelessness as in the housing first methodologies. And obviously, I would like to finish with one sentence that I like to have in mind in these times, that is that in every crisis, there is always an opportunity. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Vanessa, and just on time. Well done. I think it's really, really important that you draw attention to, I mean, as Jakob did too, is that this is like homelessness is a structural problem, and we need a structural approach and a very interconnected philosophy to make sure that we actually make an impact. And so it's really very interesting to see how you've progressed and how, you know, what things are still working and how many things we have in common across different European countries. Because as you say, when people try and start housing first in different places, very often governments say, oh, we couldn't possibly do that here. They only know how to do that in Finland because it's so different there. Well, that's not the case. It is possible everywhere, but you do need to look at the structures that you have and actually think about how we can make changes to the system. while at the same time not letting that delay the start of something, because quite often if you want to make systems change, people say, oh, that will take too long, we couldn't do it, we can't do anything about the problem right now. So I think, yeah, you've both really addressed how can we work, you know, in the immediate term, but also be prepared for that long-term work and that long-term shift. And I know I've been working on these issues for a long time, and even just to hear people talking about ending homelessness and not managing homelessness and moving from the emergency perspective to something that has sustainable solutions and leads to prevention, I think it's even if we're in a time of crisis, it feels quite refreshing to hear that that's where we're moving, that's where we're talking. So thank you both so much. I'm going to open it up to questions now and see what we get in this format. So let's see if we have questions down here. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat. Panelists, maybe you could take a look at the chat if you can, and otherwise I can just read them out. There's a question to Jakob about the cooperation with the Y Foundation, which is, I think it's not necessarily your project working with the Y Foundation, but maybe you could talk about, again, just sort of in general, the partnerships that are happening transnationally, because you both mentioned that. And I might come in at the end to talk a little bit about the Housing First Europe Hub, which is also a way to work in international cooperation. But Jakob, go ahead.
Yes, unfortunately, I'm not working in that project, so I'm not working directly with Y Foundation. But as far as I know, the two projects have very similar structures. And in our project, we work with apes, first of all, by copying their method to Poland, of course, with some minor tweaks to make it more suitable for Polish situation. We have study visits in Portugal. We were supposed to have a visit from the Portuguese team in Poland for them to see how it is implemented in Poland. It didn't happen due to COVID. I know that we are also supposed to have some kind of cooperation with the final results, because there's, of course, a lot of different papers to prepare. I think there should be similar rules between the Cooperation Fund and Y Foundation, but unfortunately I haven't seen their application for the co-op project, so I cannot say that for sure.
Maybe I can say something about, so I'm the coordinator of the Housing First Europe Hub, which is a network in which, in a less sort of structured way than a European project necessarily, but what we do is we bring together organizations, foundations like Y Foundation, like Hogarsi, cities, governments, etc., in a network, so that people can learn from each other, share from each other, and in particular, work together to develop the tools that we all need to make the case for scaling up Housing First. So if you are interested in that sort of cooperation and that sort of network, we have a website. It's Housing First Europe Hub on the internet. You can reach out to me directly if you have some questions about that. But I think what everybody sees, like you've both mentioned, is that this idea that you can call up or email a colleague in a different country, you will find that they are facing some of the same challenges and probably or possibly have come up with some of the solutions already. So I think this international work is even more important when it comes to have Housing First and trying to make these big structural changes. So thank you. Are there any other questions from our attendees? There's quite a lot of people out there. As I said at the beginning, it feels very strange that we can see each other, but we can't see you. So don't be shy. Maybe I'll just ask a question myself. Jakob, how easy or how difficult was it to use European social funds? Was it, and what kind of tips would you give to people watching or listening? Is it about working with your managing authority? Is it about finding partners in your own country? What would you suggest?
Well, actually, again, I wasn't involved in creating the application, but I worked with the managing authority before they announced the call. And I think the advice here is to work with them as much as possible, because on their own they will never
Mm,
come up with an idea of financing housing first, or even I would say housing projects in general for homeless people. In a Polish situation, I think that was not very imaginable for them. So yes, that opportunity were given by the transnational network and by Fianza, that meeting the managing authority in kind of different environment, which allowed us to speak more openly, I guess. That established a good link between the NGO sector and the managing authorities, and we were able to convince them that housing in general is very important for homeless people, housing projects, and including housing first. What we wanted to do at the very beginning was to have a call for projects for housing first only. But they said that that would be too narrow. They wanted to have a broader spectrum. So as I said in my presentation, we had 10 projects, I think, financed under that call. Two of them in housing first, but the other ones, as far as I know them, and I know I think two or three of them quite well. They're in transitional housing, so it's always something important for a country that works mostly in institutions. So
yeah.
it's not a lost case here. Um, I think also the idea of bringing delegates from European countries to network with Polish future project givers. Sorry for getting lost in my English here.
That
But
sounds
linking people from Europe and from Polish NGOs was very important, and the MA was fully aware of that, because we asked them to speak about the call for projects at that event, and we also told them that we will have people from abroad who are potential partners for Polish NGOs, and they were very eager to cooperate with us in this area. I think there was a lot of motivation on their side because of the low intake of the transnational projects. But anyway, it went quite well, and I think yes, informal contacts with your managing authority are very important.
okay. Great. Vanessa, I don't know if you want to comment on that. We also, I see a question in the question and answer saying that indeed housing first works, and it works for 80% of the cases, in some cases even more. And the question is, what about the people for whom it doesn't work? And so I don't know if anyone wants to take that question, Vanessa or Jakob.
Yes, it's clear housing first is working for the people that is work. The thing that, for example, in the data that I saw in my presentation, the thing was that the services, the homelessness services that are offering right now to the homeless people is not working because they are not being used properly. I mean, if it's an emergency center, must be an emergency center. It's impossible to try to use these kind of services that must be exist. That's true, because there are people who is needing that kind of support in one moment, but these services are becoming in a long-term solution, and that's in my point of view, that's the problem, that the services that are now on the table are being using in a wrong way. So you must use the services, emergency services, and other kind of services for what they are, and housing first, and housing led, and housing long-term solutions for other people. for the people that this is working, this kind of methodology, for people that the system has not given a solution.
Good. Thank you. Jakob, do you
I
want to
think
come in on that one?
I mean, we don't have very much experience here, so it's hard for me to tell that by an example. But I think at least my idea of housing first is that the more difficult the client is, the more intense the support should be, and this is um, shown by the difference between the ICM and ACT approach, right? In our project, we have decided that we are closer to the ICM approach, but for some clients, the ACT is more suitable, and we want to provide them with that. And I think there are more steps on this way. It's what some chambers call the reverse staircase, I think, showing the growing intensity of support for people with more and more complex needs. For some people, it may be housing with 24 hours services, for example. It depends what kind of problems they have, obviously. If these problems are possible to overcome or they are not, for example, some health issues that prevent them from reintegrating into society. It's very hard to generalize the method of helping people who are not being helped by housing first, but I think the key question here is the intensity of support.
Yeah, and I think also I would say that it, like you mentioned, it's about structural and sort of philosophical approaches. So if you move your system to one that puts the person at the center and puts their housing at the center of the response, and then make sure that they have the support that they need, whatever it is, then I think that will work, because you can increase the intensity, like you say, Jakob, when it's necessary, or decrease it when it's necessary. I think it's also important to remember that housing first as an approach, as a philosophy, as an approach, as a system, is ever evolving. As we learn what is working, we have to keep reflecting on what works, what doesn't work, and continue to improve on it. And I think you see that in places which have been doing housing first for longer. If they take the time, they look at their services, they look at what is successful. A country like Finland, for example, where they're looking at sort of housing first 2.0, where they say, okay, these are the things that are working, but for example, we need to make sure that we're addressing all of the health and wellness questions of the people who are in the housing. And so they're doing research, they're looking at that, and they're being able to then reflect on what other services or what are the gaps maybe in what they're providing, and how can they fill those gaps. So I think, yeah, it's exactly as you said, it's something that we keep building on. But if the right to housing and the right to, the support that goes with the housing when you need it is at the core of something, I think it will in general respond to what people need. I think another example I would say is that it was in Housing First for Youth. We recently published a evaluation of the Housing First for Youth pilot project in Scotland. We're talking about that on Thursday in a webinar on the conference. But they use the term stickability. And when they use stickability, they mean about the support. So that it means that if a person needs to move from one place to another or needs a different kind of support, that Housing First team or connection, somehow that will always stick with the person so that they don't get lost and they don't fall through the cracks, as so many of the people who need Housing First will have done before. So I think it's a work in progress, and I think that sort of self-reflective nature of Housing First allows people who are working in it to look at themselves and continue to check that they're progressing as staff, as services, as systems. So I don't know if there's any other questions, but I see that we've gone a little bit over time. So I might suggest that we wrap up here, and thank you to Vanessa and to Jakob for very excellent, concise, and very both dense and very readable and understandable presentations. I salute you in this format, which is not always the easiest format to communicate your message, but thank you very much for doing this with us today. Thank you to the participants who stuck with us through the technology and for asking your questions. And just to remind everybody, this has been recorded. It will be available on the FANSA website in the next few days or a week. And keep an eye on our website too, on the Housing First Europe Hub website, because we will be following up and asking people to sort of give us maybe in written form of some answers. We will also maybe post these presentations so you can go back and take a look at them as well. So thank you again. Keep checking into the conference because there's lots of other great presentations to watch this week. And thank you both especially for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to all the tech support from the FANSA and Housing First Europe Hub team. Thank you all. Okay, goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.